Hello, folks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looking good. Apologies from John, Ben, Diane Kelsey, Jude Foster, Ferg Campbell and John Casey. Are there any other people who have passed on apologies? He's typing fast. Anybody else? Okay. Moving on to then to the minutes from the previous AGM from the 17th of November 22. These were emailed to everybody in the package of documents. I don't propose going through the minutes, but essentially I can say that essentially all we did last year was vote in a new committee. If anybody's got any questions or observations or anything about the minutes from last year, please let me know. And if you haven't, can somebody please move that the minutes of the 2022 AGM be accepted? Joe did that. Seconder. Heidi. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, second thing we want to talk about reasonably quickly is the AGM President's Report from 2023 that I forwarded to everybody yesterday. I'm happy to read it if you want me to, but if you've all read it, there's not a lot of point in me reading it again. Can I get a sense from the meeting of whether you'd like me to read it out again, or are you happy with the document you saw the other day? Okay, excellent. I won't read it again. There's a couple of things that are slightly different on there. I refer at one point to it to Ian Anderson withdrawing as membership secretary and passing the database across to Alan. And Alan had a conversation with Ian the other day, and he's quite happy to carry on. In fact, wants to carry on. So it was a bit of a miscommunication of how that's happened. The bottom line is that some of the functionality of the original database that Ian administered is now being transferred to Visual Pursuit. So, but there is some things, and particularly historical data, that we do need to maintain. We're under the impression that he wanted to back off a little, and so Alan was going to pick up the database, but he tells us he wants to carry on, so he can carry on. So Ian Anderson will be carrying on as membership secretary. Within the list of committee members for next year, I made a couple of mistakes. I called Janine and Diane the projected image secretaries instead of the print secretaries, so they knew, everybody else knew, so it was me who was wrong. And Anna Stevens is actually also withdrawing from the committee for next year, although she's promised to do lots of work and other things, so that's a really good sign. But other than that, that is my... Oh, and you know, John Ben's on there. Yeah. Other than that, that is my report to be presented to the members. I'd like somebody to move that the report be accepted. Seconder. Alistair's the fastest. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Financial report. Alan.
You will have all received a copy of the financial report prepared by the Community Capacity Accounting. And I would just like that to be moved, that it be accepted. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. First. Well,
there'll be a bit of an explanation later on about where we're moving with this. That's kind of separate from the financial report from previously.
Yeah. I've got something to read out that I prepared this afternoon. The Society is in a good position financially at this moment. However, it has become apparent that the annual membership subscription needs to be increased, and we will be talking about that in general business. Suffice to say that subs should cover the day-to-day running costs of the Society. Because we've had extra income from the National Convention in 2021 and from running the Southern Regional Salon this year, we've been somewhat insulated from the effects of inflation. The Society has purchased a new laptop for the print secretary, plus we've also purchased new radio microphones. As these are assets, I've been tagging the funds used for purchasing these items as coming from the Convention and Legacies Fund. If I hadn't done that, then the general fund would have been in the red. The income from the Laurie Thomas Salon was down this year due to lower number of entries, which I think in a large part was due to the Greymouth Club running the Mawhera National Salon of Photography at the same time. Ian will be speaking to the future financial planning of the Society and general business as well. And lastly, I'd like to thank all those members who volunteer their time and energy in making the Society a successful organisation. I would also like to thank the rest of you for coming along and participating in the activities of the Society, as by just being here you contribute to our success. So I move that the financial report be accepted.
Seconded by Mike. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Excellent. The next element is election of officers. We have sufficient people to fill the officers' positions, and we don't require an election. So essentially we're just going to appoint the following people. Myself as President, Dennis Chang as Vice President, Alan Moore as Treasurer, John Hawkins as Secretary, and on the committee, Andrew Miller, Jan Bogue, Diane Kelsey, Janine Money, Nicola Jackson, Heidi Anderson, and John Ben. Does anybody have any questions about that, or comments, observations, enthusiasms, volunteers to be the President? No, never seems to happen, does it? Okay, all those in favour of accepting the nominations for the officers of the Society? Yeah, and again, if we don't, carried, done. Right. General business. Amendments to the Constitution. How do we get this going? Oh, again, you've had a document that I'm just going to read the summary of. There's two components to the Constitution we want to amend. The first one is the current section when it relates to appointments to the committee members. Now, there's a little bit of history here. This was modified a little while ago when there was a problem, basically, with a committee that got a little bit over-enthusiastic and the direction went away from where the masses of the members went. And there was a restriction put in there basically to make it a little bit more difficult or to create a greater continuity. What the effect has done, I believe, is to make it a little bit more complex than it needs to be to determine who are the President and the Vice President. What we have proposed here is a slight rewrite that maintains the integrity of that idea but makes it a little simpler. We're pretty happy for anybody to be the Vice President, provided they fit the criteria to be a committee member. So you might have somebody coming in from another club or somebody with a set of skills that's appropriate who just joins the club, puts their hand up to be helpful, and would be a fantastic Vice President. It seems unrealistic to require an extra period of a year on the committee before that person becomes the Vice President. So I'm proposing that we let that lapse. And the other part of it is the President. It is totally appropriate that a President should have some time on the committee. I experienced taking over as President, I had the criteria, which was at that point 2 years, but I hadn't been on the committee for quite some time. And it takes a little while to get up to speed, so I'm not uncomfortable with having time on the committee. But once again, if we had a superb candidate who comes in from another club or has another outside experience, I don't want to be limited in any way in how we use them. So the proposal effectively means that anybody who becomes a member of the committee must have been a financial member of the society for 6 months. So that's unchanged. And a person who wants to become the president has had to have done a year on the committee before they become the president. So a fast track person could come in, do 6 to 8 months as a member, join the committee at the end of the year, be on the committee for a year, and then become president thereafter. So effectively we're talking 18 months to 2 years after the date of joining. I'm comfortable that that is an appropriate amount of time for that to happen. Basically we need to get your approval to make that change to the Constitution. Does anybody have any questions or observations to make on that? And is the general feeling, what do you feel basically? Okay, if nobody has any objections, I propose that Section 11 of the Constitution be amended to read, I'm not going to read it out, but as according to the statement for Section 11 that was submitted to the membership. Well, some nice words that say that. I'm sure you can write it better than that. Do we have a seconder? All those in favour? Against? Okay, Section 18, subscriptions and levies. We've got ourselves in it's just an untidy way that this is written. There's a couple of components to this that we're working through or seeking to amend. Basically, the way the Constitution is written, the membership runs for the financial year. So from September to September is what your membership is. And you pay it towards the end of the year, or quite often people pay it in January, and it's paid at the end of the year. So I think most of us, I certainly perceived it to be that the membership was a calendar year. Now, there's no reason that the membership year and the financial year have to match up, so it tidies up the arrangement to transfer the membership year to start in January. So 1st of January to beginning of January to the end of this December will become the membership year, and unrelated to the financial year, which the accountants and Alan can call whatever they like as far as I'm concerned, and it relates to the finances, nothing else. The other disadvantage of the system that we currently have, or is currently in the Constitution, is that if we do, as we do this year, need to make an amendment to the subscription, we have to, amongst the rules it says it has to be held at an AGM following the end of the financial year, and it can then only apply in the year after that. So the net result of that, end of the financial year is in September. Sometime later, like November, now we have an AGM and we decide to increase the subscription. We can't charge the subscription until the end of the next year. So the situation became a potential problem earlier this year when we were considering one of the options for coming to the RCC was to bear the extra cost that they proposed for the increase and to offset that with an increase of subscription. We wouldn't have been able to get the increase in subscription in for a year and a bit after we had committed to paying the extra fee. So that's untidy. So the proposal for Section 18 does two things. It basically shifts the financial year to January to December, membership year, sorry, and the financial year remains where it is, but it also tidies up some wordings relating to levies, which is just a wording thing. Yes? You can, but it's the same deal. It still doesn't apply until the end of the year after. We could have done exactly what you're saying. Yep. No, it's It relates to it relates to the financial year. Because the membership related to the financial year, we couldn't apply it until the beginning of the next financial. Where it worked out, it was going to be January in the year. The RCC put up the fees after our AGM. So let's say we held the AGM tonight, and then next week they say to us, okay, we're going to increase the fees, and we decide to pay the fees, but to increase the subscription, we could hold, you're correct, a special meeting in January, but then we still couldn't apply that till the next financial year, beginning of financial. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So the way we're going to I hear what you're saying. I do see what you're getting at. That's another way of fixing that problem. Yep. From AGM to AGM. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, we could do it that way. The way we're proposing is to do it that the fees run in the calendar year, and that at the AGM, like now, because we're doing it later on, we fix the fees for the next calendar year. And that will allow us to do those sort of, if we have an extraordinary situation within that calendar year, then we could use a special meeting. I kind of want to avoid special meetings for, unless we have to, for something sort of exceptional. I wouldn't want to have a routine special meeting every time we proposed a increase of fees. Not sure what everybody else thinks, but that's my take on it. Okay. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. If we pass that now, we will be in the situation where our membership then begins for 2024, starts on the 1st of January 2024. So we have this kind of limbo bit in the middle. So what we're proposing to do is we're saying to everybody, you will have all got membership subscriptions in the last month or so. If you pay your membership for the 2023-2024 financial year in 2023, it'll continue for the entire calendar year of 2024. So the rate at the moment is $120. So if you pay that before the end of the year, that will be your membership for the remainder of this year and all of next year's calendar year. If you wait until the 2nd of January to pay it, and we, further down in this meeting, increase the fees, you will be liable for the increased fee. All nod and smile, go, oh, Ian, that's a good idea. Maybe I should pay my bill. Okay, that's how we propose running it. Are there any other questions? Mike? Yes, there is, and that's written in we'll discuss that later on. The other thing we wanted to say, there's a pro rate, there's family memberships, with all those sort of things adjust a little bit. We are completely open to, if people have problems with this for whatever reason, we can split payments, we can discuss things. So we're not going to make up other ways of doing it, but we are open to other possibilities. So if an increased fee when we get to that part of the meeting becomes a problem, come and talk to us, and we'd rather have people as members than not. Okay, so back to where we are at the moment. I'm proposing that the Constitution Section 18, as presented in the email to all members, be accepted as the change to the Constitution. Do we have a seconder for that? Jan. All those in favour? Against? Done. Thank you for that. That's going to simplify things for us significantly. Setting of subscriptions. One float after the other. Alan, do you want to?
You can see from the slide up on the screen where our income came from. You can see parts that are classed as income, but the sorts of things that pay for themselves, like the Laurie Thomas School is really funded by the Laurie Thomas Fund. And it's self-funding, so people pay their part, and that isn't part of the day-to-day running costs. So the day-to-day running cost, so that's the income there that we get from subscriptions, from interest, and from the raffle that we run on final night. This is the expenditure, and you can see how much that we're spending. And 16,955, pretty much $17,000, and we're getting about 15,000 in for subscriptions, from income from subscriptions, interest, and raffles. It's not quite enough. Oh, wrong way. Oh, that's them all together. We'll go past that one. Hard to see. So you can see there from the summary how much money we spent. Bit of a difference. So I've basically proposed to put the subs up to 150 a year from the 1st of January, and hopefully that will cover. Probably going to have to get a few more members to come and join. As well, because there are a few members, some of us that aren't paying. We've got life members and 4 of us on the committee who get an honorarium. So, but if you have a look at that, at $150 a year, it's $3.75 a meeting for about 40 meetings a year, which is, I think, pretty good value. Yeah. Well, the big expenses would have been, we got another laptop and I think a couple of radio microphones, but I took that money from the Conventions and Legacies Fund. Yeah, and you know, you can see how much things cost. You know, competitions cost, you know, $1,500, and that sort of, also you could add on to that the speakers and judges gift cards, and then you've got the courier costs for shifting the prints, or sending prints off to judges and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so this is day-to-day running costs we're talking about.
Yeah.
Again, and sort of operating expenditure versus capital purchasing and stuff like that.
And the final night's actually, oh no, that's higher of the meeting venue. Yeah.
I don't know, won't guarantee it, but the conversations we had with them last year, they are pretty happy with where we're at, and they came back to say they actually want us here, as opposed to the impression we got with that significant increase was driven by, by their sense that we were using the facility they wanted available to them. That's why letting them have or not using the supper facility is kind of satisfied that, I won't call it a faction, but grouping within their membership who have that concern. So I don't think I got no sense that they will want to increase the price.
Say that again? Well, that was mostly pure salt. Yeah, so they're self-funded, so that's not...
So that's one of the things that makes the accounts a bit hard to follow, because we get money in from people who are going to do, in that case, the Fiordland trip, which was 47,000. But every trip that is paid for, we get money in, and it goes in the income, but it goes straight out again in the expenses. It's a net thing. So the operating costs it shouldn't relate to.
So these are the current the words disappeared out of my head, but amounts that we've got in the account, balances in the account. We've got nearly 60 grand in our notice saver, as you can see, and most of the interest that we get comes from that. So in a sense, the interest that I put in the income isn't really that available to us to use. So
that's
yeah,
next.
yeah, we're going to be talking about that. Yeah. Well, we have to give 3 months' notice to get, and it's been like that for a while now, and it's been quite amazing just how much the monthly interest has increased over the last 12 months. Possibly, yeah. What I will look at is we're going to look at dividing it up into the Conventions and Legacies Fund into a couple of separate funds, and maybe and one of the funds I think maybe we could put into a long-term investment, because it will be there in case we have to shift from here and spend money on a venue or something, just to bring it up to what we need.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But basically, we want to cover our operating expenses with subs.
Yeah, that's the day-to-day running costs.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm hoping not much, but that's yet to be seen. The membership has it got to its lowest point probably a year ago, 18 months, and it's been gradually building. And maybe if we could ask some new members, were they surprised about, if we said it was 150 versus 120, would they not have joined? My sense is probably wouldn't make any difference.
When you think that we meet weekly, we have something like 40 meetings a year. It is pretty good value for money when other clubs. I mean, I remember when I joined CPS, I looked into Pixels, and they were about half price, but they were meeting once a month, and it just didn't make financial sense to me. It was far better value to come to CPS. That was my. Can
we get the next slide, Alan?
Yep.
This is significant, the next slide. And it comes from the IRD inflation calculator. It's a bit hard to see the words in there, but 2018 is the last time we increased the subs to $120. And I put into the calculator $120 of 2018 dollars, and Q3 2023 comes to $148.72. So effectively, we are just talking about a CPI increase. We're not talking about anything radical. And a CPI increase with a fairly small member base, which I hope will grow, will allow us to have an operating basis that's self-sustaining. That's the sense we're looking for. And we will talk in a minute about the rest of the funds that we have there and what we want to do about that. But our feeling on the committee was that the organisation should be self-funding when it comes to operating expenses. We shouldn't be aiming to go backwards. Absolutely. If we had 220 members like we did when I joined, the numbers would be right up. And if we end up sitting at 140, 150, that would be fine as well. And if anybody wants to take over a role of, active recruiting and putting out those, I'm happy to hear from anybody who wants to do that. But at the moment, all we can do is our calculations based on our current and fairly solid number of members that we have at the moment. I'd be loath to suggest that we maintain a membership fee that is not self-sustaining, as at the numbers they are at the moment.
Next.
Does anybody else want to make a comment? Well, then we'll... No, we need to vote. Okay, so I move that the CPS subs increase to $150 for the 2024 year. Is there a seconder? All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Okay, and remember that in the 2024 year, if you're astute enough to pay while we're still in the 2023 year, you will be immune from this increase and we'll wear it for another year. We've got some other thoughts about, let me talk about what we're going to do overall with money. And what I would, in general sense, I think we'd spend it, is where we're going with what we want to do. Okay.
Next.
I'll talk about it first and then maybe get a thing. Okay, I want to go on to the financial planning criteria or bits and pieces. So this is the organisation of resources. It was the end of the financial year, so 78, nearly 79, 80,000. Alan said the numbers, showed you some numbers that are more current before. The bottom line is that we've got about 80 grand sitting in the bank. Last year we had 90 odd, but a good chunk of that was monies that had come in from people who were going to go on the Fiordland trip, so there's a bit of a buffer in there, and that's what it is. And the society divides those monies into these kind of three funds. The Laurie Thomas Fund, we also have a thing called the Conventions and Legacies Fund, and those two are relatively static. The Conventions and Legacies Fund has stayed there at 53,000, nearly 400, and the General Fund is what we use for our operating expenses. I just want to talk through the functionality of each of those funds and how they work and what we want to do moving forward. So first of all, let's start with the Laurie Thomas Fund. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. There's the Laurie Thomas Fund. The real good thing about the Laurie Thomas Fund is it's got a defined purpose, it's got a funding base, and it's got a structure that we all know about. We all know the story of Laurie Thomas, and it's got some history, and it kind of works. So the purpose of the Laurie Thomas Fund is to run the Laurie Thomas Landscape Salon and the Laurie Thomas Winter School. The profits from the Landscape Salon are used to subsidise the Laurie Thomas Winter School. When the Laurie Thomas Fund was initially set up and the Winter School started, the feeling that I've had portrayed to me from people who are on the committee was the expectation was that that fund would reduce over the years. It's still going strong 25, 26 years later because it's been structured in such a way that it's self-funding. The fund has also received occasional legacies that have come to the society that have been put into the fund for the purpose of carrying on, and as we saw, it's still sitting at about $24,000, $25,000. Basically, at the Laurie Thomas Winter School, the fund pays for the tutors and the tutors' expenses, and people pay for their hotel accommodation and food, basically. Those tutors' expenses have gone up, and the last couple of years we haven't quite covered the costs. So we're going backwards slowly, but even if we go backwards at $3,000 a year, there's $25,000. We've got a few years of the Laurie Thomas Fund still to go before it gets to the point where it was expected that it'll be by 1980, really, when it first happened. So it's done well. It's done well because it has a structure and it works. So that's the Laurie Thomas Fund, which I think will just leave exactly as it is and is an outstanding success. let's move on to the next one. We've got this thing called the Conventions and Legacies Fund, and every time that I've been to one of these meetings where there's a proposal to increase the fees, there's this $53,000 stuck up there, or the $78,000 we've got in the bank, and people go, why don't we spend some of that? And there's a logic behind why not, because some of that money has come from legacies from people who left money for the society in the early stages, and a lot of it relates to property. So there was a desire for CPS to own property, probably in its earlier and stronger days. I am delighted that we don't own property. If we'd had property during the earthquake, it would have been a complete and utter disaster. And even if we had property that was working now, we would be property managers, not a photographic society, and we don't want to be property managers. So to be paying drip feed for the facilities when we use it is worked out well. But we do need to honour the people who left legacies, and we do need to be aware of what they are. The problem is when this fund was put up, it was also combined with conventions. So when we make significant profits, which we have done from conventions and other things like we've done the last couple of years, that money has all just got biffed into the same fund, so to speak. So there's no structure, there's no organisation, there's no legacy, there's no really understanding of it. It's probably possible to go back through all the books and find out who gave legacies for what and when and how and determine it. But if you've ever seen the pile of old meeting minute books in the top of the cupboard there, I welcome somebody to search through them and find what they are. I think we just need to say that, yes, there was something. We had a discussion with the auditors about this, who kind of said, why have you got so much money, basically, given that you're a charity? And then the discussion about these legacies kind of happened, and it was like, well, what can we do? If they've been given for something, what do we have to do? And the theory being, if you don't use it for something that ties in with what it was presented to, you're supposed to give it back. And if you don't know who to give it back, guess who wants it? So the rules as they are written state that we need to be doing something that honours this stuff, or we give the money back to the government. And I don't want to do that. So what we're proposing to do is to rearrange this fund into something which honours the legacies that we have, but moves forward. So that's as it stands at the moment. It ends up with $53,000 sitting in the bank account, earning some interest that we do. That's about all that happens. So that's what we've done with it. What I want to do is, next slide please, is to split the Conventions and Legacies Fund into, 1, a property reserve fund, and 2, the CPS Photographic Education Fund. Okay, so let's start with the property reserve fund. Yes, please. The property reserve fund. The purpose of the property reserve fund, and this will be kind of written in the meeting minutes, so it'll have some weight, is to acknowledge and honour past legacies, and to maintain a reserve fund with the capacity to modify and upgrade any new facility should we need to move. So we want to keep some money aside that was given to us for property purposes, and we want to, have the ability to move into a new place, put some lights up, put some, curtains in, streaming facilities, whatever we need that what we've got here, we have the ability to do that. The funding for this reserve fund will be supplied by interest from that reserve fund, so we'll set that up, and it's not something we're going to spend all the time, so we are going to be able to maintain interest of it. Any new legacies, if somebody wishes to leave CPS some money, they will invite them to put it in whichever fund they want. They may choose that it goes into the property reserve fund, they may choose that it goes in the Laurie Thomas fund, or they may choose that it goes in the education fund. And in times of surplus, if we got a whole bunch of members and we make a lot of money and for some reason we're not doing anything and we have a surplus, we may, in time to time, move some money into the fund to increase that. We want to set the initial funding at $20,000. So that's the Property Reserve Fund. The Education Fund. We wish to task CPS committees to spend approximately $3,000 per calendar year on furthering photographic education for the members. So that might be buying some lights for a studio setup. It might be running some workshops. It might be, there's any number of things you can do. But the committee is going to be tasked from here on in, subject to the approval of the members, of spending some of this money. The $25,000 will be the initial fee. We're going to spend, say, $3,000 to $5,000. So we've got 5-8 years potentially before this fund dwindles to a smaller number and we have to rethink about it, with a significant benefit to the membership as we go. So funding will be supplied once again by interest of that, new legacies, any further income from conventions or things of that nature that has happened in the past will go into this fund, and from a transfer from the general funds in times of surplus. And we're going to set the initial funding at $25,000. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of it. Okay, that's kind of the summary of it. We want to split that $25,000 up, and we want to start spending it, but we want to be able to have a written, formulated honouring of the legacies that we have had in the past and have just been sitting in our bank account in the meantime. Does anybody have any questions? Mike? More easily. I think that's a good idea. Would you be happy with the principle that we accept it if that's what we're going to do at this meeting, and tag the intention is to put it in the Constitution this time next year? I think we're in that situation anyway, aren't we? Well, how would that was the reason we're going this way, to try and get rid of some of that stuff, to tag the other bit. That's the way we viewed it. Spend up here, get the momentum of spending going, and get the sort of general expectation that there is something. And then the systems will come in place to spend those things, and then it might be that the membership's increased and there is an increase and we can put money into it and all that sort of stuff, or as you say, we go apply for funding. So absolutely, yep. Well, that's the point of this in some respects, because they haven't been catalogued. They are catalogued and stated. The ones that we've had in the Laurie Thomas are there. You can see them. But now if we have legacies, if a legacy comes in, the person will be invited to put it in somewhere, or if they don't, we'll collectively decide it goes in whatever fund it is. But it will be recorded in the fund's separate accounting, if you want to put it that way, and will be much more transparent. Again, that's the purpose of doing it this way.
So the spreadsheet that I use has a facility where we can tag the funds, which I haven't been doing up until just recently. And that means that all the money that comes in for Laurie Thomas Winter School is tagged Laurie Thomas Winter School, is tagged Laurie Thomas Fund, and the income that we got from the Southern Regional was conventions and legacies. We bought a laptop that came out of the conventions and legacies fund and that sort of thing. So that way we can keep track of it now much easier. Oh, right, yeah. Well, yeah.
If somebody wanted to donate a significant amount of money to the education fund, we'd happily call it the Wayne Barnes Education Fund, if that's the case. John. Yep. Correct. The rest of it goes into the, and that's why I thought there was another slide there that wasn't, which is saying that the rest of it goes into the operating fund, and the reason for that is because at the moment it all sort of operates as it moves in and out, and it is kind of I won't call it a slush fund, but that's where the operating expenses happen. We do need a general fund that sits at probably whatever it was left. I think it was about 12,000, something like that. It's going to sit there. It's going to get expanded by subscriptions because everybody's going to pay before the end of the year, so it's going to be nice and healthy, but it's not going to be at the $150 for next year's expenses, so I can expect to see that general fund make a loss next year. Yeah, so the general fund that was sitting in the original thing at about $1,000, that's not enough to have in a cheque account.
There's one thing I'd like to know as treasurer. I've set the website up to send you all an email on around about the 1st of November, just to remind you to pay your subs. As it was, your membership would have run out on the 30th of November. That's when you stop being a member, because once you're 3 months past the end of the financial year, you stopped being a member. And I set it up like that because there were people made comments several years ago that they hadn't received a reminder about their what their subs were going to be and all that sort of thing. So, and I thought it's a good idea to get that. And I'd actually like to leave it happening so that people will get a reminder in November. I'll reword the email, but what you may well see if you have a look in your account on the website, that your membership might still be running out on the 30th of November. Well, that's just simply so that the website will send you an email rather than actually being that your membership is finished, unless you would like it to be a month later. But I just think it's nicer to get people to start paying their subs as soon as possible, because we start to run out of money towards this time of year. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'll send out an email and explaining everything to everybody. So that's how we're going to work it.
Okay. So when it comes to the financial planning, I don't believe that we actually need to pass a motion at the AGM to approve that process. We can just move forward and then change some constitution settings if we need. But if somebody likes the idea and wants to suggest that the financial, what do we call it, planning process as it defined is accepted by the meeting, I'm happy to carry that as a motion of acceptance of what we're doing. What I'm saying is we don't need it, but if you want to say yes, that's a good idea, please do. Could you think of some words there? Sounds like Wayne's proposed. You'll find some words. Person, thanks Wayne. A seconder. Mike, all those in favour? Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. At that stage, that concludes the business that we have, so I'll close the meeting at 7:55. But while we're here, I'm happy to answer any other questions or anything else that anybody's got. Other than that, let's go and get a cup of tea. Yep. We've discussed that. It would be a good idea, and that's some of the expenses out of the training fund could go towards that as well. That's the sort of thing. So, yeah, bring it up in the new year on the committee, and we'll go. Yo. Well, I'd like to think yeah, this is why we're trying to do it, because we've got the situations where the old conventions and legacies fund was poorly defined, and it had legacies in it that we didn't know what they were, and it wasn't administered. But so the proposal is to move forward. If somebody wanted to leave some money to the Laurie Thomas Fund, that's great. It can go in the Laurie Thomas Fund and have that continuing for a while. And like I say, we've literally had that. But equally, I would expect to say to someone's grandson, "Oh, that's really great. Thank you. There's a couple of funds you could choose from. Would you be interested in contributing towards an education fund or a property fund?" And that's as much as you'd need to say, and they would then decide, and we would put it in whichever fund seemed appropriate. The point is to clarify that more than it was before, so I think it's a step in the right direction. Yes. Yeah. I agree, but that's what we've left with now. As I said, we're quite open to naming one of those other funds, if that happens. You could, yeah. One of the key things here is we would like to be able to honour those things where they happen, not have them just absorbed into something that 10 years later people haven't got a clue what it was. So, Mike? Yep. A legacies register per se. Yep. Yeah, great idea. Great idea. Just let's have a year to nut that out properly. Yeah. Thank you very much. I've never been applauded before for charging more than we did before, so that's really good. Okay, let's have a cup of tea. We'll see if we can find Jenny, and we'll move forward. It's going to be a great program for the rest of the night. Thanks very much, everybody. Auditorium area, please. Ring the bell, someone. Okay, everybody, thank you for your assistance in the AGM. A couple of notices before we go. For those of you who brought along your tin can pinholes, that's really cool. Stuart tells me he got a bunch of good images from everybody. Remember, we're having a showcase of that next week, so go and take those images and put them up on the showcase. And for those of you who had a digital pinhole camera, I'm hoping that there's a few pictures from the showcase going up for there as well, and we'll have a look at some pinhole images next week, which will be a great way to finish off. We're getting pretty close to final night and starting preparations for that. I see a pile of things to go in the raffle. Just a reminder, if you're sitting here going, oh, I had those things that I was going to bring and I've forgotten, please bring them next week. There's one more chance, and we'll get ourselves a good group of raffles for final night. That's what we're aiming to do. So thank you, Stuart, for scanning all those pictures and getting the pinholes ready to go. Right, the rest of the show is going to be really something special tonight. I would like to introduce Jenny, who was a long-time member of CPS up until a few years ago, when Jenny and I entered into one of the scavenger hunts, and we did this team effort for the scavenger hunt, and quite frankly, I think we should have won. I'm not really bitter, only just a little bit bitter still, and it's 5 or 6 years, but I do notice that Jenny left CPS not long after that, so I think she's probably still pretty bitter about the fact that we didn't win the scavenger hunt. So competitions are really important. Jenny has been involved in a number of photography groups outside CPS that I'm involved in. We've got this Freeman's Groupies, bunch of people who all went to Freeman Patterson workshops, and now we have a dinner spectacular once a month, which is tomorrow night, so that's something to look forward to. And she's been a long time photographic sort of companion, effectively, and that sort of thing. When she went to become an artist, and she's going to tell you about the story, which is really cool, it kind of felt like she deserted us because she decided she wasn't going to do photography. She was going to be a sculptor instead. She was deserting photography. But you will see that the whole thing comes around in a circle, and they look like photographs to me. And she'll be telling us all about it. So I think this is going to be a fantastic story. It's a really interesting journey, and it emphasises that each and every one of you, if you are a photographer and you pick up your camera to make something and you're making art, you are in fact an artist. So when Jenny tells you about her story, her journey to become an artist, we're all on the same one. So have a look at her journey, you'll learn a lot from it. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jenny Reeve.
project. That was just what a new mother and a 4-month-old baby needed. So off we all went. Ron was the one with the camera in those days, but when Laura arrived, I picked it up for baby photos and special moments. I was lucky to be a stay-at-home mother for nearly 5 years. Interest topped out at about 20% plus, and it wasn't easy on one income. I'd always been a keen cook and had a growing collection of recipe books. Ron thought I had far too many, but I found a good use for them. Does anyone remember that building? Laura was 4 in 1985. A friend, Liz, and I started a small catering business which we named Strawberry Fair. That morphed into the restaurant of the same name 2 years later. We replicated the restaurant in Wellington a few years after that, and during a fit-out over Labour weekend, both our husbands caught a late afternoon flight to Wellington to help with the work. John was directed to paint the ceiling, and Ron, who had organised the materials for the cool room shelves, was to construct them. Liz and I had been in Wellington for about a week, so we downed tools and raced to the airport to get them, still in our overalls and hairnets. As we stood waiting for them, we noticed that the crowd had moved slightly back from us. We were quite grubby and paint splattered. After the two husbands recovered their composure, they stepped forward to greet us, carefully. We also opened a cafe in Christchurch, Cafe Metro, on the corner of Kilmore Street and Colombo Street, but the earthquakes claimed that building. The restaurant and cafe were our full-time occupations until 1999, when I sold my half share to Liz. She still owns and runs them today, and I still have a growing collection of recipe books, but Ron doesn't seem to mind that now. I had a year away from working until we bought a hospitality hire business. We did marquees, tables and chairs, crockery, cutlery, glassware, enough for up to 1,000 people at a time. In summer, it was frantic. In winter, it was quiet. That was our maintenance time. It took me a year of watching and listening and learning on results nights at CPS before I felt confident enough to enter a competition. But a C-grade competition was the start of becoming more serious about photography. I was encouraged by the judges' comments. Thank you, Ron Williams. That encouragement led me on a photographic journey. But for me, it's not, are we there yet? Because that implies a destination has been reached and the journey is over. For me, it's more, what's next? Photography was the catalyst for a very enjoyable and rewarding involvement with the Court Theatre. I was working as a volunteer one Sunday morning at the City Mission. The person I was working with had just bought one of the first digital SLR cameras and was reading the manual. Both of us were interested in photography, so we chatted generally about our interests and discovered that we were both interested in the Court Theatre. Strawberry Fair had been advertisers in the show's programs, and we often went to the theatre. To my surprise, a few months later, I was asked by that person at the City Mission if I'd be interested in joining the Trust Board of the Court Theatre. I said yes, and served as a trustee for 6 years. I resigned in 2010, because I was asked to go to Brunei. Is everyone clear about where Brunei is? Some people think it's Dubai, but it's Brunei. To work with Ron and a team of 7 guys on an aviation project at Royal Brunei Airlines. I knew there was no room for passengers on a board like the Court Theatre, on any board, not on any board either for that matter. Although today's digital platforms may have meant I could have stayed on, I thought it best to resign. Before the earthquakes, I did a large project for the theatre, documenting the spaces, people, rehearsals, readings, and several shows. This sustained type of project over several months was very interesting and rewarding. The deeper in I got, the better it became. That was a good lesson. I like to think I did my best work for the Court Theatre. She's laughing. I gave them our firstborn, our only born actually. Laura worked for the Court Theatre for 5 years, finishing up as their front of house manager. She was upstairs in the building during the February earthquake. I'd come home from Brunei to finish off the court's photography project and experienced the February quake. Ron was still there, so he missed both of them. We called him our earthquake virgin until the Christmas one, when he ran into the house, as white as a sheet. The car he was working on was jumping up and down on the garage floor. My role in Brunei was twofold: to control and catalogue the records for 6 Boeing 67 aircraft as they left Brunei in a staggered process over several months after being sold to Aerosvit, a Ukrainian airline, and also to do a full photographic documentation of the 6 aircraft during and at the completion of the end-of-lease maintenance check. The aircraft owners wanted a full photographic record during the final maintenance checks and at the point of delivery in case there was an argument later. For each aircraft, I prepared between 40 and 50 boxes of records. So those 5 handsome lads were in the team. You can see Ron there. Ron and I often wondered what has become of the team of young Ukrainians that we worked with on that project, given the situation in Ukraine today. Photographing 6 767s in the humidity and the heat in Brunei was something else. The ground crews had a couple of mobile air conditioning units that we could use to cool the cabin down, but the electronics bay under the floor was quite a different matter. It was hellish down there in that heat. Did you fly those in? You did. Brunei was a really interesting place to work and spend time in. We were there for a year and we were made very welcome at Royal Brunei Airlines and had a good working relationship with their team. Ron and I enjoyed the local food too, trying the local restaurants rather than sticking to the hotel restaurants as some of our colleagues did. I'd had some experience photographing aircraft when I did a photographic project for Motat in Auckland, although the context at Motat was very different and getting a clear shot was next to impossible. I photographed while Ron looked after the gear, which we pushed around on a sack barrow because I didn't want to leave anything behind in case I needed it. We had behind-the-scenes access, which was great, and this in-depth project was another valuable experience. Not many people today can say they've crawled through the interior of a Lancaster bomber. It made us both think that the rear gunner position in a Lancaster bomber would not have been a long-term role. It was quite sobering. I returned to CPS when we came back from Brunei in 2011. I'd gained an LPSNZ in 2010 and an A in 2012, and some of my Brunei images, that's my A set over there, made it into the A set. I tried for a fellowship once too, but it was F for fail. It's still on my bucket list, but that's for another day. Just after we returned to Christchurch, after the earthquakes, I was invited to join the Court Theatre's newly established foundation, which was set up to raise funds for the temporary shed in Addington and a new permanent theatre to come, which I did from 2012 to 2016, finishing up as chair. My association with the court was very rewarding, and it was a pleasure to do voluntary work in such a creative space. That's probably not the job of the century, really. Back home, and keen to keep working on my photography, I knew I needed another project. I decided to set some restrictions for this one and estimated it might take a year. I wanted the restrictions to try to train my eye to find interesting images without leaving home, because we'd been away enough for a while. My restrictions were that everything was to be in black and white, with a square frame, and every photo was to be made at home or in our house and garden. About that time, Patty Madsen, who was a CPS member, had returned to live in the USA. We emailed occasionally, and she told me that she was doing an iPhone photography course. After a few more emails, we decided to share an image each week, each with our own set of restrictions. She used her iPhone exclusively, and I used my Canon, which was a 5D Mark II. We exchanged an image every week for 52 weeks, and it was great fun. We both looked forward to seeing what each other had made, and we both enjoyed writing about our own images too, and then in return commenting on each other's. For me, the writing was just as important as the image making because it helped me to clarify my thoughts about the why and how, but really it was mostly about the why. Why did I choose to make that image? We did that for 2 years, but in the second year, my personal restrictions opened up to weekly themes, like a colour or an object. That's pasta, dried pasta. And this one is the reflections of Christmas lights on a barbecue lid. So it looks like a barcode, but mine are white again. And then I went a wee bit crazy for a while with the threshold filter in Photoshop. So I wondered what was next on my journey. I'd heard about the Southern Institute of Technology and Digital Photography course, which was not only free, but I didn't have to go to Invercargill to do it. I could do it at home, which was great after a year away. I really enjoyed that course and I learned a lot, and I think there's quite a few CPS members who've done that. I know Carolyn Alcock's done it because she and I graduated on the same day, and it was very nice to share it with you too. My final project was to create a website specialising in food photography, which led to professional food photography jobs. This one was for White Tie Catering, who are friends of ours, and I did them over several years, and in the end they just would give me the recipe and say, here you are, make it, photograph it, do what you like. That's how that happened. Besides food, my other photographic love back then was architecture. I did some work for a construction company, photographing their hotels in Christchurch and in Wellington, and some of their big construction projects, including the main freight depot in Sockburn, and several other new buildings at Canterbury University, including the Structural Engineering Laboratory. Looking back, I find it interesting that neither of these preferences for food and architecture involve dealing with people too much. I'm not a wedding photographer. Now, this is the Break Free Hotel in Cashel Street. The interior, their reception, and that bright pink changes through the day. It's LED as it rotates through. And their rooms, one of their room styles. Then I went to Wellington to do the Sofitel, which was brand new and very swanky indeed. This is their bar. It's come out quite dark on there. And one of their rooms. The Structural Engineering Laboratory, I photographed the concrete pour for the floor. It was a project that started at 11 o'clock at night. That's when the concrete pumps arrived. And after about 200 truckloads of concrete of varying composition, I suppose you'd say, it was finished I finished at midday the next day. We were very lucky with the weather. At 2 o'clock in the morning, it was 18 degrees. Laura kindly showed up with hot chocolates at about 4 o'clock in the morning, which was really nice. The floor is very thick, and the engineering people there attach structural experiments to the floor and the walls and push them, so that it'll test with the breaking strength of the structure. I also had the privilege of working on New Zealand Camera for 3 years, which was a huge amount of work, but with a great team of people, including Ian Walls and Anne Bastian. It also provided some good lessons in patience, in expecting the unexpected, attention to detail, that some people just don't read instructions, and that some people are just plain stupid. This year's book arrived last week and it's spectacular. I love the cover, so congratulations to James Gibson and the 2023 team. I became an accredited judge. Do we call them judges or assessors now? What's the new word? And whatever it is, it was in 2012. In 2016, my journey reached an unexpected fork in the road and I turned in a new direction. To provide some context, I was talking on the phone to my brother John, who lives in Perth. He's the youngest in our family and I'm the oldest. And he has a master's degree in commerce. He'd had an opportunity to figure out what was really important in life because he'd had some really seriously bad ill health. During the conversation, I told him that I should never have started that commerce degree in 1970. He went straight to the point, as he usually does, and he asked me what I would have done instead. It was something I'd never voiced before, and I answered the direct question without really thinking through the implications first. It was one of those straight from the heart, blurt out replies. I'd have done a fine arts degree. And his reply was simple. What's stopping you, Jen? I told him I'd never had the conversation before with anyone, let alone Ron. John told me I should have the conversation. I called him back less than 15 minutes later, telling him that Ron says, if you want to do it, then do it. This part of my journey would take me places I would never have imagined. A portfolio was required for admission, and luckily it was still within the closing date. I made an appointment to see someone who might be willing to assess my portfolio and make some suggestions about what I should do to plug any gaps before finally submitting it in mid-November. I saw John Christoffels and he made a suggestion. Jenny, you should put those drawings at the back and concentrate on the photography. But to my astonishment, further into the interview, he also said, Jenny, I think we should just accept you today. I was speechless. Applications hadn't even closed. I called Ron and my brother from the car and I floated home. So in 2017, I spent a year at the University of Canterbury in the Fine Arts Department, starting this degree. I loved everything about it, and I was by far the oldest student in my year group. I was old enough not just to be their mother, but in some cases their grandmother. But they were fabulous. I never ever experienced one ageist comment at all. There was a girl one day who came up to me and said, Jenny, yes, I want to ask you a question. Okay, go for it. I want to go out on Thursday night, but you know I haven't been very well, and the doctor's given me antibiotics. Do you think I should take the antibiotics, or do you think I should wait until after I've been out? I said, well, Rihanna, it just depends on how quickly you want to get better. That was the only time anybody ever pulled the mother or grandmother's question. During the first semester of the first year, we spent 2 weeks looking at the 5 disciplines that Canterbury University teaches. So there was philosophy, sculpture, design, film, and painting. During the second semester, we each chose 2 disciplines to be covered in more depth, and we also had compulsory art history papers, which were like a free history lesson. They were just extraordinary. I loved them. My choices were photography and sculpture. At the end of the first year, we submitted our first and second preferences from our 2 disciplines, and this is where Ian's comment comes in. Acceptance was determined by marks, and there were no guarantees. I chose sculpture as my first preference, which might seem odd after having spent so many years doing photography, but I figured I could use photography within sculpture, but not so easily the other way around. I was accepted for sculpture, and of course we still had the compulsory art history papers, and that year I also did an extra level 1 paper in philosophy. It was interesting on day 1 to discover the workbook. All first years were given a hefty hard-covered A4 book with blank pages. Blank pages seemed very intimidating back then. These are the workbooks, and we're in the seminar room, and we're all sitting there nervously looking at this huge pile of books. We were to use the books to draw in, write in, record thoughts and ideas. I thought it was a personal book, so I was shocked to find out that it was to be marked. Luckily, I hadn't written anything incriminating or rude in it, but I felt my soul had been bared enough already during the critique sessions. Crits could be brutal, but CPS results nights had helped me to not be too sensitive. I handed in my workbook and all was well. We bought our own books after that, and I still keep one. It's not really a diary, but the number of times I have referred back to those books is staggering. It's a really useful record of ideas, experiences and thinking that are so easy to forget, especially when you're busy. I value all of mine. Unlike during my first year when I didn't want anyone to see them, there's a couple down there, and I feel confident enough now that if you want to have a look, you're welcome to. I won't be offended if you don't. We were encouraged to draw as a way of thinking things through, clarifying thoughts and ideas, and encouraged to embrace drawing in its broadest sense. And I constantly thought about Minor White's quote. That's me on the floor with a drawing board. I never really got very good at it. One of the first projects we did was to map a route or a journey to an allocated place on the campus. So that was the results of my mapping. We could map any way we wanted to. We could make an audio file of sounds, record the journey photographically, or make sketches. I did the audio file, which was quite interesting to listen to later in a quiet space. There were planes and snippets of conversation. And it also rolled out a ball of string. The journey was preserved in a glass jar, which I still have, and the tags read how far from here to there. It seemed that in the first year we had lots of short, tight, timed projects, and gradually as we got through the years, the projects got longer and deeper. The plaster casting project was great fun, but it was quite frustrating. It took many tries to get a whole plaster cast of the inside of my balloons, but I actually think the ones with the cracks and the holes, there are some on the left, are more interesting. I'd fill up a balloon with plaster, blow it up a little bit, and then walk the corridor rolling the balloon. And it was, the hard part was getting the balloon off so that you had the smooth exterior without looking like the two on the left. And it was about this point in second semester that I considered choosing sculpture to carry on with. I had a bag of photography gear and I knew my way around a camera, but I really wanted to learn something I knew nothing about. The first year was a sort of roving year, moving around the various studios, but with no fixed abode. It was exciting to have a more permanent home in year 2. So in year 2, here we are. 8 of us settled into this studio for the year. Among the set projects we had to complete was making something from a 1200 by 600 millimetre sheet of plywood. We could make anything we liked. Most of the class made flat things, cutting the ply into strips, weaving it, or cutting Mondrian-style holes out of the sheet as a sort of Mondrian-style negative, and so on. But Minor White was calling, what else can a sheet of plywood be? I made a ball. It was playful, fun, and different from anything anyone else made. I'd never used a lathe before, so I can tick that off my bucket list now. I probably don't ever need to use a lathe again. And there's my final image of the finished ball. We also did a project called the Bunnings Challenge. The class went together to Bunnings and had 10 minutes and $10 each to buy something, anything, to make something with. I bought hot glue sticks and made them into curtains. My classmate Anna bought $10 worth of disposable face masks. In 2018, no one knew how important face masks would become just 2 years later. One of my favourite set subjects, or propositions as they were called, was to respond to a site of our own choice within the Fine Arts Department. I chose the foyer and the main stairs in Block 2, which is the admin and the gallery where the Sofa School of Fine Art Gallery is. And I went to Bunnings to get some coloured tape. It was much later that I realised my photographic subconscious had chosen tape in the colours of cyan, magenta and yellow, which worked perfectly with the black granite steps. Photography had obviously gone deep. Quite absolutely unaware of the photographic significance of cyan, magenta, yellow and black. And the final installation was this. I had 3 special installation assistants that day: an able-bodied husband, Ron, Ian Walls, who was partly on crutches, and Laura, who was definitely on crutches. She just had her ankle reconstructed. She cut the tapes for the stair risers. This was the final work I did in second year. This slide is of a maquette that I made to kind of prove the concept, which is what we were taught to do. And this is the final installation view. It's made of fluoro perspex with an LED strip light in it, and the edges glow with or without the light source. So for my final submission in second year, and I actually sold it on the opening night of the tie-tap sculpture garden exhibition, which is quite exciting. A little bit of detail. So, university holidays, the term finished around October and we didn't start again until halfway through February, so quite a long time to have a rest and have a bit of a holiday and resume some housework chores that Ron had taken over during the term. So year 3, the studio space got bigger. That same 8 went into this section here. The work got harder and it was in much more depth and the expectations were much higher. And I became a lot more interested in what was happening to Canterbury's braided rivers. In year 3, I wanted to try using ice in different ways to illustrate the states of water, which is illustrating change and movement and trying to convey the concept of time. I hoped it might convey movement as it melted, and it did, but not to the level that I wanted it to. That's these ice drawings on the left-hand side. I mixed ice and ink, water and ink and froze them, and then just laid them on paper. What have I got here? Sorry. It didn't to the level I wanted, so it was to the river, and back to the river, and for photos and more source material. Ron, bless him, came with me on all my river visits because he thinks that a remote riverbed is not the best place for a woman on her own. And I was glad of his company. We always took a picnic, and it was a day trip to go up from home to the Hurunui River. And we went many times in all seasons and in all weathers. Each time it was different because rivers have moods. They have good moods and they also have bad moods. And you have to be very mindful of your safety when you're making work. I'll come to this, making work actually in a river. On this day, we were at the mouth of the Hurunui River. It was very early in the morning and it was winter, and the sun was reflecting strong, low morning light off the clay cliffs on the south side of the river and onto the water. And it was a gorgeous morning, and as a photographer, I was just in my element. I took loads of those photos. One of them went on later in fourth year to be printed on cotton, and I'll come to that shortly. I also made some videos, and this one was projected through translucent fabric in different shades of blue. And for my final submission in third year, I decided that glass reflected the increasing fragility of the state I saw the rivers becoming through time as various interest groups used the rivers to satisfy their own agendas. I called this one Before the Rain There Were Clouds, and the final installation looks like that. So at the end of every year, we had to present a finished work, and we also had to write an essay to accompany it. So again, another holiday, and we're back again in the middle of February. And this was my studio this time. It was a smaller studio, but there were just two of us in there. And we used our walls as vertical workbooks, as well as using the actual books themselves. 2020, as we can all remember, was a difficult year for art students, just as it was for everybody. Bunnings and Mitre 10 were closed, and our biggest problem was how to make when we couldn't get materials. The challenge was to use mail order or be inventive with repurposing what we already had or had already made. We could take it to pieces and remake it, or what we could beg, borrow or steal. And the university was closed too, of course, so we had no access to the school's workshop. I was lucky that Ron has a workshop full of tools, but if you're 21 or 2 living in a flat away from home, you don't have access to tools. I was quite fortunate. This was one early idea, photographs again. We got up early and went to Shag Rock to make a series of images, one each hour, to record the tide, the weather, and so on. And the day was lovely. Lockdown was to be lifted the next day, and the TV news cameras were at Sumner Beach because they'd heard that beachgoers were pushing the limits of the lockdown. We were pushing the limits too, I'm embarrassed to say, but fortunately the cameras were only at Sumner Beach, not at Shag Rock, and we were not on the news that night. My interest in time was developing further. My online research was for texts about time. I found several, but what would I do with them? It's all very well finding these things, but then you have to turn them into something. Obviously, time was to be invested because we had to make something after all, and I realised that Morse code is a time-based language. I translated a text into Morse code laboriously and embroidered the text in cross-stitch onto a piece of fabric I already had. After that, it was onto online shopping. I thought naively that this embroidery wouldn't take too long. Wrong, very wrong. For the first one, I used a text by St. Augustine of Hippo, which he wrote in 397 AD, and he wrote of his difficulty in understanding time. Another was from T.S. Eliot's poem, Burnt Norton, and I wrote a couple of poems myself. I found a translation app that sped up the process and embroidered dots and dashes for absolutely hours. Then the question arose how to present these two-dimensional pieces of cloth in a sculptural way. So I laser cut supports from opaque perspex and suspended the works from the studio ceiling. And the next image, the one on the right, shows the studio floor where I'd kind of worked out a pattern and a complicated system of using a laser pointer to locate the points in the ceiling. My sculpture lecturer came in, took one look at the plan on the floor, took a look at me, said, "Nerd," and walked off. The one on the left, that's Ron and Laura in the garage at home, figuring out how to join my perspex supports together. Everything had to be perfectly square, which meant even 1 millimetre out would compound over the length of the installation. In the end, thanks to a huge weekend effort by Ron and Laura and me, we got the thing in the air. And I was really pleased with the final installation. The photo that I showed you earlier of the ripples on the water became the left photo, which I kind of figured out that pixels are the smallest unit of information in photography, in digital photography, and cross-stitch was the smallest unit of information when you're embroidering Morse code, dots and dashes for hours and hours. So I quite like that link up. The one, this one just here, is that printed onto cotton, and I picked out the colours. It's a bit hard to see, but I picked out the colours in the fabric and embroidered those into the corners as well. So 2020 was a difficult year for everyone, but there were good lessons to be learned as well in problem solving, resilience, learning how to have lectures online and doing online research without access to the vast university library. Laura was wonderful during my uni years. She proofread most of my essays and all of my final submissions. She told me that she'll check it for grammar and spelling, but the structure and content were completely over to me. She wasn't going to take any rap for any nonsense with that. So we've nominated her as our family's police department of spelling and grammar. I graduated in December 2020 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Sculpture with first class honours. And then, what's next? It had been an exciting 4 years. I was quite tired at the end of each year. We had a little holiday, Christmas came and went, and I slipped back into the household chores that Ron had taken on while I was at university. He was much better at getting things out of the freezer for tea than I ever was, or ever probably will be. I'd started reading again during the year, books on time and braided rivers, doing online research and making notes. I went several times to the uni library. This thing wasn't letting me go. In about April, Ron noticed that my reading material was not including recipe books, and there was very little what I call domestic goddessing happening. "Are you thinking about going back to uni?" he said. No, I'm just interested in the subject." "Oh," he said. By about June, I was ready for the conversation. "I've been thinking about going back to uni for masters. How would you feel about that?" I'd seen these signs during our river visits, and they'd really bothered me, particularly the one on the left where it says no swimming. These ones are at the Huranui River, at the mouth of the river. Mouth of the river. But similar signs are found near other rivers in Canterbury. I remembered swimming with my family on those hot afternoons in the Waitoa and the Huranui. Today, these signs warn against it. What was happening to these beautiful rivers, and what was being done about it? My research showed me that the Resource Management Act, which has now been repealed, the definition in the RMA for braided rivers was inappropriate. They were treated in the same way as the likes of the Waikato River or the Whanganui River. I knew that art had been a catalyst for change in projects where the environment could have been permanently harmed if the project had gone ahead as it was originally planned. I'm sure there are people in this room who will remember the John Hanlon song about raising Lake Manapuri and the bumper stickers that went with that. "Damn the dam," do you remember that? About the fantail flew into the sky to bring power to the people, all this beauty has to die. So masters it was, because I had this deep conviction that the rivers needed to be spoken for, just someone to speak for them. I didn't need a portfolio this time, but I had to submit a research proposal, and I needed 2 supervisors. I'd enjoyed a good relationship with John Christoffels. He's the one who accepted me that first day. and by that time he'd got his doctorate, and I'd enjoyed my time with artist and sculpture lecturer Steve Cart, and they both agreed. Research was to include Canterbury's braided rivers from the perspective of Ngāi Tahu as well, and also I looked at rivers in other countries. My research showed me that there were 163 braided rivers in New Zealand, and that 60% of them are in Canterbury. Braided rivers are globally rare and important, but it's not just that. They are the genesis of the Canterbury Plains, which is the very land on which I have lived nearly all my life. I felt very strongly about it. Looking back into the rivers, to the memories I held dear from childhood of those evening swims, was where much of my inspiration came from. But I still wanted to bring a photographic component into the research. What is photography when it's boiled down to its simplest meaning? It's drawing or writing with light. I read about Sir John Herschel, who, according to some texts, was the person who coined the word photograph, drawing with light. He also invented the process of cyanotype, and I used this process to make the work for my final submission, but in a way that is different from that which Herschel intended. His work became known as the blueprint and was used as a way to reproduce plans and documents. He used the cyanotype as a contact printing process by placing an object, for example a plant, onto a piece of sensitized paper. He discovered that he could make an image of the plant. But instead of doing as he did, I used a subtractive process. It was all a bit experimental, I have to say. I sensitized my paper at home in the dark with the light-sensitive solution, and I let it dry overnight, then rolled it into a light-proof covering. I took the papers to various braided rivers in Canterbury to make an image of a river, or more correctly probably, an image of the environment of a river. These papers are big. There's a couple over there which Ron and Laura will hold. Oh, Ron, thank you. They're 2.286 millimetres or metres long. Thank you. And 710 wide. And these papers were too big and too fragile to manage in a fast-flowing river by myself. But with Ron's help, together we managed to wrangle the papers in the water to wash off. We'd dip some of them and pour the water from the river over. These things are non-toxic too. These cyanotypes are not toxic, so don't be alarmed about polluting the rivers. So we washed off some of the light-sensitive solution and laid the paper on the rocks to expose the light-sensitive solution, what was left of it, to the sun, which was kindly provided for free by the sun, ultraviolet light. And I loved that the element of chance became such an important part of the work. It seemed sometimes that all I was doing was facilitating the process. It was actually the rivers making the work. It was exciting and liberating as I handed the paper to the river and waited to see what the river would do. So the one on the left that's the title image, and it's the finish image as well. That one we'd done some dipping, put it on a tarp to dry and expose, and then we took it, once it had dried and finished exposing, which took about 90 minutes, we then took it back to the river and washed it, or developed it, if you talk about a photographic process that was developing it just in plain water. The one on the right is the developing, and it starts to oxidize and the colours change. The two, it's a bit hard to see them, but the bigger one of those two has not been washed. That's just straight from processing on the river. Yeah. So the other ones, these ones and the long ones have all been washed, but this one has not been washed. The colours are quite different. And these things are a bit unusual. If you put them in a sunny spot, they will fade over time. And some people really like the idea that they're going to fade. But then if you put them under your bed or somewhere in a dark space, then the colours will come back. So this is the completed one. And then a couple more in process. This is the same. The ones on these two here, it's the same piece of paper, it's just the front and the back. So we worked out how to we took them to the river at the same time. You can see these kind of blobs of colour here, which is where it's washed off, and it gets this kind of mucky, ochre-y colour, and then gradually, as the sun does its magic, they start to change. That one was the white one, you can see it there, the Waipa River. And the finished article looks like that. Once they're washed and oxidised, you can leave them in the air and they oxidise by themselves, and you can hurry it along with a bit of a spray of hydrogen peroxide. I don't like doing it like that. I prefer to just let it do it naturally. And this is our setup on the Waimakariri River. You can see the bridge there, and that's Ron setting up the chairs. We always took picnics. We took gumboots, extra jackets and rugs and sun hats and gloves. I always work with disposable gloves because it can get a bit messy and it does stain your skin. A watering can. We had a bit of a kit that filled the back of my little Mazda. And then it occurred to me that perhaps I could make some small cyanotypes, and I didn't really want to make them on the same paper. This is an imported commercial paper that I buy in rolls. It comes from the States. So I thought, what if I make my own paper? So this thing here, this contraption on the far side, is called a Hollander beater, and they were invented and named for the paper makers in Holland, which was a necessity becoming the mother of invention, because in Holland it's flat and they don't have fast-flowing rivers like Europe or other countries do, and the UK, of course. The school's beater was a bit of an old dog of a thing. It ran noisily for hours, and it was very difficult to get it to run properly. I couldn't get it adjusted properly, and that was probably because of years of students forcing old blue jeans through to old denim jeans to make paper. That didn't help. I got there in the end. I took a stick blender from my kitchen down to try and get the pulp as fine as I could, and made it in the studio. And these are the sheets drying. Well, actually, they're the sheets that I tried sizing. They're very absorbent, like toilet paper when they're not sized. Whoops, sorry. The other thing that was really important to me to incorporate into my final submission was the concept of time in a different way. And think about how you might do that. It isn't easy when you don't even really, you can't really even find a conclusive definition of what time actually is. But it seemed that the more I learnt, the less I actually knew what time is and how I could articulate it in a sculptural fashion, which of course had to be understood by a viewer and also by my examiners. So I decided again, I was hammering away at this ice, so I took an upright freezer into the studio and made ice blocks that were, I think, about 700 long and out of drain pipes that we'd capped one end, 150 mil diameter. I used water from the Huranui River, which we harvested one day. It's a good word, isn't it? Harvesting water from the Huranui River. These became the subject of a time-lapse video. I realised that I would need to wire something onto a rope to hold the ice, to stop it falling off before it all melted. I didn't want it just smashing into the bottom of the bucket. Ron and I camped overnight in the film studio on a freezing night. I didn't want the heaters on for obvious reasons. The first take was unsuccessful. I needed the camera to run constantly, but each time I changed the battery, even with the enormous film department tripod, which was held in place by huge sandbags. It moved slightly, and the final video was jumpy, so there was really only one thing for it. To do it again, I was a wee bit nervous about telling Ron that we were going to spend another night in the film studio. I figured out how to run the camera with mains power using a dummy battery, and the second time it was perfect. So 2 overnights in the studio for about 9 or 10 minutes of video, but I was thrilled with the effort, and I thought it was so worthwhile. I showed it on a big black digital screen for final submission. I also made a small artist book using the cyanotype poem process and a poem that I wrote about the rivers and the way they're degrading. And it was nice to make a small scale work after the great big papers in busy, big, fast-flowing rivers. And we're nearly at the end. The photo on this one, on the right, you can see the handmade paper with cyanotypes on them. And we rigged them up with some purpose-made steel brackets and hung them from stainless steel wire. And I graduated in September this year with a Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture with distinction, which was a real thrill. So what's next on this journey? Who knows where it will end? Ron over there, Wise Ron, says the day you stop learning is the day you die. He makes my crazy ideas seem doable. And he also has the knack of bringing me back down to earth when these crazy ideas, I'm struggling to get them out of my head. I'll always be grateful to be sharing my journey with him and with Laura. I'm also lucky to have a great group of friends, including some special photographers who became quite interested in sculpture a few years ago. They shared this part of my journey too. Sometimes I think a journey is like a problem. It's much better shared. All this journey culminated in a recent trip to New York, Chicago, and France, where I was thrilled to see the work of some of my art heroes in the flesh. My first Malevich, you remember seeing one of the very first slides, was a special moment. I had thought that it would have been good to have seen these works before or during my study, but I know now that I would not have been ready for them. I know that I needed this journey to lead me to them without hurrying, but waiting for them to appear. It was so exciting to finally be in front of them. I wish each of you well on your own journeys. All journeys, including the journey through life, we all have to contend with problems, potholes, flight disruptions, U-turns, road cones, and sometimes we just simply run out of gas. My journey's been like that too from time to time, but with a willingness to give things a go, taking opportunities with both hands, and being involved in a supportive community of like-minded people like this one, special things can happen. My journey is becoming something I could never have dreamed of, and I hope yours is too.
That was awesome, Jenny.
Thank you.
I feel privileged that I've seen bits of this journey, but to hear the whole thing plotted out like that was just like a quantum leap better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really cool. Anybody got any questions while she's here before she escapes? Quick, say no and escape. Thank you again. It's a simple thing, come and talk about your journey, but what a complex story and what a fantastic story and what a way to finish the year for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I was going to say at the beginning that I hope that if people didn't want to sit to the bitter end, that they might just slide out quietly, but I think that we've still got the full lot, which is very nice. Thank you.
Come and have a look at the cyanotypes. We'll close up. They take another step forward. Thanks again. I don't think I really want to say anything after that. That was really cool. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the AGM. It's super. Thank you for Jenny. And see you next week for our last meeting.